Okay, today we're reading chapter 9 of the novel. So make sure you're following along in your book. If you hear some noise shortly, Mr. Alex is coming to sweep my room and he likes to bang things around, but we're going to record this anyway. So just bear with that background noise if you hear anything. Although I didn't know it then, my initial days at Shadow Grove were more important than the sum of the events that filled them. They were my initiation to the strangeness of my new situation, and my introduction to the further strangeness that was to follow. As life settled into place, I became used to the regime here, there, what had at first seemed noteworthy, began to seem commonplace to me. There was a regular routine to which I quickly became accustomed. I grew used to waking to the rosy light of a southern dawn and to watching the sunrise fade from two sections of sky. I settled into the routine of taking an early stroll around the grounds, although Gabe was never again going to be a part of such occasions. I could see him sometimes engaged in the morning run, and he would smile and wave as he passed me, but he never stopped to talk. The truth of it is that during those particular weeks, Gabe didn't talk to me much at all. It was as though the romantic attraction that initially flared between us had been killed on that mad drive back from Merville. It wasn't that he totally stopped speaking to me. The morning after our traumatic evening, he apologized profusely for having been so dumb and reckless and for having terrified his sister and me. He paid me the money to cover the fine for speeding and even volunteered to carry the pre-addressed envelope the police officer had given me down to the road to hand in person to the mail carrier. Beyond that point, he was polite and pleasant. Well, we were together as a family, but on all occasions he kept his distance, both physically and emotionally. When I pressed him on the subject of his driver's license, he was at once both vague and seemingly candid. I let it expire while we were living in Chicago, he told me. I'm sure that by now you've noticed how worried my mother is. She was so uptight about my driving in city traffic that I never got used to the car, so it didn't seem important to get my license renewed. You could have had it done in the months since you got back, I said. It can't be that hard. You wouldn't think so, Gabe agreed, but it's turned out to be a hassle. I've had to send to Baton Rouge for a certified copy of my birth certificate, and for some weird reason, I'm having a heck of a time getting it. The original is there someplace, of course, but there's some sort of messed up in the records department, and they can't seem to find it. They're doing a search, but in the meantime, I'm not supposed to drive. And so the slow-paced days of summer slid one into another, indistinguishable except for Wednesdays, which were the days when Lizette's cleaning girl came. After my stepmother's dinner table dissertation on the Cajuns and the exotic descriptions I read in the books in the library, I have to admit to experiencing a slight feeling of disappointment when Selena arrived that first Wednesday, dressed in a Mickey Mouse t-shirt and blue jeans, with an iPod attached to her belt. A quiet, gentle-faced girl, not much older than me, she wore her long brown hair pulled back into a ponytail and worked to the accompaniment of hard rock channeled to her through earphones. After all the stories, I was unprepared to meet someone so pleasant and ordinary. So the mother Lizette and also everything she had read about the Cajuns had shown that they were like, these really exotic, spooky voodoo people. And so the cleaning girl is a Cajun, and so she's just surprised to see that she's really normal and that she's not really special. As summer progressed, so did the heat. I could literally feel it increasing from one day to the next. By the third week of June, the promise of it was there awaiting me before I opened my eyes in the morning, and by 9, the total weight of it was already starting to descend on us. The midday siesta became not only acceptable to me, but a necessary part of each day, and evenings didn't drop to a temperature that I considered comfortable until several hours after the sun had disappeared behind the oak trees, so they took a nap in the middle of the day, every day, because y'all know how hot it is in Louisiana. I dearly missed the luxury of central air conditioning, but it wasn't coming to Shadow Grove anytime soon. As Lizette pointed out, the place was designed to be open to the air, and it would be impossible to seal it up for air conditioning. What did we do with ourselves during those long, drifting days of heat and inactivity? We were all there together, and yet our lives didn't mesh. Dad was involved with the writing of his novel. He had submitted the first 3 chapters to his agent, who was now in the process of negotiating with a publisher, and Dad was hurriedly trying to finish a complete outline before going to New York to work out the details of a contract. As for Lisette, she always seemed to be busy doing something, dusting furniture, doing needlework, preparing meals. Sometimes she sat at the piano in the parlor and tinkled out delicate melodies that I had never heard before. On other occasions, she would change pace abruptly and start pounding out strong Dixieland tunes that shook the walls. She spent a lot of time doing things with flowers and would spend long periods of time standing at the kitchen counter, arranging roses and antique vases, and floating cream-colored gardenias in low silver bowls. Once or twice a week, Lisette drove into town to do errands and to shop for groceries. Often on those occasions, Josie and I went with her to check books out of the library, or go to an afternoon movie, or simply to wander browsing through clothing shops and record stores. After my initial morning at Shadow Grove, Gabe didn't express any further interest in accompanying us to Merville. Instead, he seemed suddenly to have developed an all-consuming passion for fishing. Through a classified ad in the Sunday paper, he bought himself a second-hand rowboat with an outboard motor and moored it in the rushes across the road from us. From then on, we hardly saw him. Every morning he would disappear with a fuel can and his fishing gear immediately after breakfast and would reappear around dinner time, sometimes bringing back a few bass, but more often than not he was empty-handed. Once Lisette surprised me by suggesting that he take me with him. "Don't you think it's time that you showed Nora some of the scenery along the river?" she asked him. "It's like a whole foreign world back there, so green and lovely. I'm sure she's never seen anything quite like it." Gabe shot his mother a quick, dark glance and shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "There's plenty of time for that. We've got all summer." "Sometimes it's better not to put things off too long," Lisette said. "You never know what problems may arise if you do." "I said later," Gabe told her briskly. "I'm just not ready yet." He turned on his heel and stalked angrily out of the room. That evening he didn't come home until after dark. The rest of us had long since finished eating, and Josie and I were out in the kitchen in the process of loading the dishwasher. Gabe entered the room without a word of greeting, served himself from the soup pot on the back of the stove, and left again, still without speaking. A moment later I heard the sound of his feet crashing hard on the stairs and realized that he was taking dinner up to his room. "Why is he acting this way?" I asked Josie, not attempting to conceal my hurt and bewilderment. "He seemed to like me when I first got here. What have I done to make him so mad?" "You haven't done anything," Josie said. "Gabe gets like this when he's under a lot of pressure. He's got things on his mind, that's all." "What sort of things?" I asked her, and then, as a possible explanation occurred to me, could it be that girl he used to go out with, the one who gave him the herbs he used in the anisette? He said she lived in a cottage over by the river. Is he seeing her again? "No," Josie said with certainty. "Felicity is gone. She and Gabe broke up a long time ago." "Maybe she changed her mind and come back," I suggested. If that were the case, it would explain so many things. The long hours Gabe spent away from home each day, the often non-existent catch after supposedly fishing all day. The often non-existent catch after supposedly fishing all day, his resistance to his mother's request that he take me with him on one of his excursions on the river. "That's impossible," Josie said. "Felicity's dead." "Dead?" For some reason I reacted with as much shock as if I had known Gabe's former girlfriend personally. "When did that happen? Did Gabe just find out about it?" "No wonder he's been acting so distant and preoccupied." "It didn't just happen. Gabe's known about it for years," Josie said. "He wasn't all that upset by it, even back when it happened. By then the two of them had been broken up for ages." "He wasn't upset by it," I repeated incredulously. "But Joe, he had to be. Maybe they weren't still going out together, but it had to have somebody your own age, someone you'd once really cared about, die." "It happens all the time, Nora," Josie said calmly. "Friends go away from you, and they do die. That's why it's better not to get too attached to people. When you do, all that happens is you end up sad." Lying in bed that night, I thought back on that statement and could hardly believe that a 13-year-old had actually said it. Despite her peculiarities, however, as the weeks slid past, I found myself developing a real fondness for my stepsister. With my father and Gabe so involved with their own activities, a lot of time that summer was spent with Josie. I grew familiar with all her favorite music, and she with the contents of my own collection. We experimented with my blow dry and curling iron, giving each other wild and wonderful hairdos. We took long walks along the bank of the river, and we lay in the sun, developing our tans, while a crew company from a company called Holiday Pools lined an oval-shaped pit with cement to create a swimming pool. Often in the late afternoons when shade fell across the courtyard, we sat out behind the house in deck chairs and drank iced tea and played card games. On one such occasion, Josie had just spread her winning hand out on the table and shouted, "Gin," when a familiar voice spoke up unexpectedly from behind us. "Aren't you a little young to be ordering cocktails?" "Dave," I exclaimed, turning in surprise. "Where did you come from all of a sudden?" "I didn't plan to burst in on you like this," Dave Parlange said apologetically. "I did ring the doorbell, but I guess you couldn't hear it out here. Celine said your dad was working and Josie's mom was napping, but she thought I'd find the two of you around back." "I'm so glad you're here," Josie crowed happily, bouncing up from her chair like an excited puppy. "I've been wondering and wondering if you were ever going to come." "How do you know Celine?" I asked, surprised by Dave's use of her name. Did you meet her when you were out here doing the roofing?" "All the old-time residents of Merville know each other," Dave said. "It's like belonging to a club that goes back 100 years. Selena was 1 year ahead of me in high school. Did you know that her grandfather Charlie used to work here as a gardener?" "Did he really?" Josie exclaimed. "My man would be interested to know that. How long ago was it?" "Way back before either you or your mother was born," Dave said. "I believe he said it was back in the 1930s. I ran into the old guy at the hardware store the other day. He was laughing about what a coincidence it is that another generation of his family should be working out at Shadow Grove for the Burges." "That's something nice about that," I said. "It's like when you finish a book and then find out there's a sequel." "Sit down and cool off, Dave. Do you want some iced tea? I'd invite you to swim, but our pool doesn't have any water in it." "No problem," Dave said. "I love to swim in dry pools. There's so little chance of drowning." "No, seriously, I can't stay that long anyway. I've got to go in a few minutes. It's my sister's 14th birthday, and I need to get her a present." "Why did you go to the trouble of driving all the way out here if you're just going to turn right around and go straight back?" In her usual quicksilver manner, Josie had, in one instant's time, switched from a beaming smile to a petulant pout. "I wanted to check with Nora about her plans for the weekend," said Dave. "Since you don't have a phone, this was the only way I could reach her." It took a moment for the significance of the statement to register with Josie. When it did, the light drained abruptly from her face. "You're asking Nora for a date?" she asked in a small, stunned voice. "I thought we might go to a movie or something," Dave said. He plowed right ahead, oblivious to her reaction. "What do you say, Nora? Would you like to go out somewhere next Friday night?" "I don't know," I said slowly. "It would be fun, but—" My eyes shifted to Josie. The pain in her face was more than I could contend with. "It would be fun," I repeated, "but I can't. I'm sorry. I already have plans for Friday." "And what about Saturday?" "I'm busy on Saturday, too." I longed to cushion the refusal by offering some sort of explanation. I was afraid, though, that if I did, Dave would compound the problem by inviting me to go out with him for the following weekend. "I'm really sorry," I said lamely. "Thanks, though, for asking me." "Yeah, well, those are the breaks, I guess." I could tell that I'd hurt him, but I didn't know how to soften the hardness of the rejection. "Are you sure you don't want some iced tea?" I asked him awkwardly. "It's only about 4 right now. You don't have to leave quite yet. The stores in Merville will be open for another few hours." "No, thanks. Like I said, I've got to be heading back." His smile was a little too brilliant, the show of casualness a bit too elaborate to be convincing. "Well, see you around, girls. Maybe we'll run into each other again at the club." "I hope so," I said. "I really do hope so, Dave." There's nothing left to say except goodbye. We both said that at once, avoiding each other's eyes in mutual embarrassment, and Dave left us the way he had come, disappearing around the corner of the house in several long-legged strides. A few minutes later, we heard the sound of his car starting up in the driveway. The roar of the engine seemed so loud in the afternoon stillness that I couldn't imagine how we could have missed hearing him arrive. For long moments after his departure, Josie and I sat in silence. It was me who finally broke it. "Do you want to play another hand?" I asked. "No." Josie had been staring down at the cards spread face up on the table between us. Now she lifted her eyes to meet mine square on. "Why did you tell him you were busy this weekend? You know that's a lie. All we're going to do is sit around." I didn't come here to spend my summer dating. I told her I came here to be with my father and get to know my new family. That's not why you turned Dave down, Josie said. You did it because of me. You knew that I wanted to go out with him, so you wouldn't. The expressive dark eyes, so much like Gabe's, so exactly like her mother's, were suspiciously bright. That was nice of you, Nor, but you didn't have to do it. Gabe was right the other night. Nothing is ever going to work the way I want it to. No matter what I do or what you do or what anybody else does, nobody is ever going to fall in love with me. That's ridiculous, I exclaimed. You're only 13, Joe. When I was your age, I wasn't dating either. But then you got to be 14 and 15 and 16. Her voice was sharp with sudden startling anger. Guys like Dave think you're pretty. They won't even look at me. But in another few years, I began, that won't make any difference. The words were accompanied by a strangled sob. I'm too skinny, and I've got zits, and I don't have any boobs, and I'm ugly, 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 ugly. The tears that she had been struggling so valiantly to hold back burst free in one great rush, as though a dam were breaking and a century's worth of pain were being spewed forth. Instinctively, I opened my arms and held them out to her, and just as instinctively, Josie jumped up to throw herself into them. Gathering the weeping girl tightly against me, I rocked her back and forth as though I were her mother, shocked and bewildered by the intensity of her outburst. You are not ugly, I told her. You're at a terrible age, 13. You're not a kid anymore, and you've got all these weird new feelings, but you're not an adult either. So there's nothing for you to do with them. What you got to realize, Josie, is that everybody goes through this. I know how bad it was. In only a couple of years, it will be all different. No, it won't, Josie cried miserably. Nobody's ever going to change, nor. Time keeps going by, but it doesn't count for anything. It does count, I said helplessly. You just have to be patient. When you grow up, you're going to be beautiful. No, I won't. The words were muffled by the pressure of her face against my shoulder. I'm never going to look any different than I do now. You will be beautiful, I repeated with total sincerity. How could you be anything else? Well, just look at your mother. I have looked at my meh, Josie said with frightening bitterness. I look at her all the time, and I hate how she looks. I hate how she talks, how she acts. I hate everything about her. You don't mean that, I said. Oh, Josie, you know you don't mean that. But even as I spoke, I knew deep in my heart that she did. Okay, go back to the Pear Deck and answer the next couple questions.